Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We are BaltimorePositive.com. You can find all of our work out in those places. My man Luke Jones can be found anywhere the internet travels. He is Baltimore Luke, out on all the social medias. Our friends at the Maryland Lottery are powering us up with these Raven scratch-offs. We'll have these next Friday. Crab Cake Tour on hiatus this week. Too much unpredictable baseball scheduling going on this week, but we allegedly are going to have next Friday off on the 11th. Luke will be celebrating his birthday, which comes this week. My birthday, which comes next week. We'll be at Pizza John's on the 11th, next Friday. In the afternoon, we're going to be having some pizza, some crab cakes, some crinkle cut fries. Might even get Luke a meatball sub or one of those delicious imported ham. They import it. I don't know if it's from Dundalk or from Italy. I'm not sure, but it's imported ham in Essex. They import it from somewhere outside of Essex, maybe Middle River or Rosedale. We're going to be down there next Friday. Our friends at Curio Wellness and Foreign Daughter, as well as our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, powering up the Oyster Tour, which is coming toward an end. I'm about to platform that the entire month of October so the folks can be educated about the Bay and about the Oyster Recovery Partnership and all of that fun stuff. Jiffy Lube has him back and forth from Owings Mills to Camden Yards. I would implore everyone to please read my Dear David Rubenstein letter. Everybody told me all summer, just give the new owners a chance. You'll have a press pass because he's a Balmer guy. And I'm like, okay. So my press credentials have been denied this week. Luke will be at the baseball games. Luke will not be in Owings Mills. See Steele, Chad. We will not have representation for at least a couple days this week in preparing for the Cincinnati Bengals. But Luke and I will both be watching the same game. He'll be in Camden Yards in our WNST press box seat, and I will be watching on the telly. It's kind of a bummer Ben McDonald and Jim Palmer go away. I'm not ready for like out of town announcers because you know how we feel about that in the playoffs. But I would say this, Luke, a different draw. I don't know if there'll be Thursday morning, we're crying and we got swept out of this thing by the Kansas City Royals. But if we would have asked for something last week, maybe we would have asked for this. Maybe when the shadows are falling in the seventh inning and they have two hits against Reagans on Tuesday night, we'll feel differently. I don't know. But how are you? Can you get baseball on the brain off of football? I mean, this has been a weird couple of days to be thinking football, baseball. Now we're going to turn it back on again and we're going to say, Lamar, who? That was so Sunday night.
Well, especially with the Orioles having wrapped up everything they needed to wrap up by Friday night. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Nestor. I think I saw about 3 pitches total on Saturday and Sunday. I mean, good job, Emmanuel Rivera on Saturday, and they get a win on Sunday. But it really did allow itself to, they had a chance to exhale. Fans had a chance to exhale. There had been a hyper focus on the Detroit Tigers and Tarek Skubal, and mainly because the Orioles had played the Tigers 6 times in the month of September. But lo and behold, it ends up being the Kansas City Royals. And I'll say this. The Tigers were the hotter team, although they lost 2 out of 3 to the White Sox over the weekend. So, I mean, they have no one to blame but themselves, I guess, if they would have rather gone to Baltimore rather than Houston for the opening round. But I'll say this, over the course of the full season, I mean, this Kansas City team is definitively better than the Detroit Tigers. And for as much as, yes, it's a good thing that the Orioles are avoiding Tarek Skubal in the first round, Cole Reagans is pretty darn good. Seth Lugo is pretty darn good. I mean, look at the numbers that they put up. Michael Wacha, who's going to be the Game 3 starter if necessary, pretty darn good. They have a guy who, in a world where Aaron Judge didn't exist, would be the slam dunk definitive MVP in Bobby Witt Jr. So this is a talented team. And I think what's so interesting about them, one, the Orioles played the Royals 6 times back in April. They won 4 of the 6, but close games in there. I can recall you and I even saying at the time, for a team that lost 106 games in 2023, it felt like the Royals were better even then. Now, I would have never predicted this, that they'd be playing in October. But the point is, they've got some really talented young players, and they've got some veterans, as I mentioned, a couple of those starting pitchers, specifically Lugo and Wacha, that have really held up that rotation to a high level. And, they added Lucas Irsig to become their closer at the trade deadline. Everyone talked about Mason Miller and the A's potentially dealing him. But I remember sitting with you at Fadley saying, hey, Lucas Irsig would be a nice addition. And the Royals went out and got him. So, I'm not sitting here saying that the Royals are this juggernaut, that the Orioles are in deep, what, or anything like that. But it's baseball, and it's a 2 out of 3. And it's a Royals team that kind of like the Orioles, not last week notwithstanding, didn't really finish the season in the month of September the way that they would have wanted. But I mean, give them credit. They improved by 30 games from last year. I mean, this was a 106 loss team, and suddenly they're in the postseason a year later. I mean, it's kind of like the jump that we saw the Orioles make from 21 to 22, and then another jump in 23. So they've got good starting pitching, and they've got a couple bats. We'll see about Vinny Pasquantino. I always struggle with that name,
I know you do.
but he could be back. It sounds like it's possible he could be back for this series, and he's another formidable bat to add to that lineup. So, I mean, I said this talking to a few people in the press box. I mean, to sit here and try to view this 3-game series differently, other than it's in October, other than the stakes being through the roof for these two teams, obviously, it's a 3-game series. I mean, think about a 3-game series of the best team in baseball against the worst team in baseball. The Tigers, who aren't even the best team in baseball, but had been red hot. The White Sox, historically record-setting terrible. They took 2 out of 3 from them this weekend.
When they needed to win.
Right. I mean, so that's where you look at this and say, I mean, you just presented the scenario that no one wants to think about, but I mean, by Thursday, this could be over.
By Wednesday, this could be over.
It could be right. I mean, I've said this. This is why I said all season long, give me the 5 days off and having to deal with some rust rather than dealing with a 3-game series that, let's face it, is a weighted coin flip at best. Maybe 55-45, maybe 60-40, right? I mean, that's what you're talking about with a 3-game set. So especially with the Royals having good starting pitching, I mean, the Orioles have to be ready to go. It was encouraging to see how they finished the regular season, the way they swung the bats. That needs to continue. You obviously have Corbin Burnes going in game 1. They need to see the Corbin Burnes that we saw over the last few weeks, which was better cutter, more swing and miss, dominant Milwaukee-esque version of Corbin Burnes, rather than the version that we saw for much of the season, which was really good, but not necessarily getting a ton of strikeouts. So, this is going to be an interesting series in that way. I mean, the Orioles are at home. They've got the home field advantage for all 3 games. That's a major edge. Certainly, they have more experience than the Royals in the postseason, although Salvi Perez will have something to say about that, the veteran catcher. So, we're going to see what the Orioles learned from last year. We're going to see what the Orioles learned over the last few weeks about themselves in terms of, hoping that the bats stay awake after it looks like they woke up here over the last week or so. But this is a Royals team that no one should be taking lightly. I mean, I think there was very much a perception because of Scooble, because of how red hot the Tigers were, that, oh, good, you don't have to face the Tigers. That's the wrong thinking, because I mean, this is a Royals team that's absolutely capable of beating them if they don't play really good baseball these next couple days.
This was the better team all
Right.
year, right? I mean,
Right.
so let's not act like we got the light load here or whatever. But how are you feeling about the Orioles? I mean, we can talk about the opponent all day long. How are we feeling about pitching now that it's just a game or two? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This isn't about will they survive the month. This is about rested bullpen, Monday off, home cooking, late afternoon, shadows, gonna have that, right? Home cooking, home crowd. It'll be raucous. It'll be like a football game out there. It should be. I hope it is. I don't know. All the football people might be a little hungover this morning. I have to, ramp it back up. And the baseball crowd's different than the football crowd. But these games, when they're done right, and I remember vividly, and again, we had just stolen their football team, but the 95, 97 era of the Cleveland Indians, I remember going to those games. It's a football game. When the Phillies play playoff games, it's like an Eagles game. It's just a different sound in the ballpark, and you know that. We haven't played not that well. We haven't played a whole lot of playoff games here. But, this is a time to look at Delman Young and say, that's all we got. That's literally, in the history of that ballpark, moments in that ballpark. I forget Cal Ripken, forget the Pope coming, because I know you're Catholic, and that's a big deal. I have Springsteen coming and Billy Joel. I'll throw those in. Those are my high priests. I'm thinking about moments in that ballpark, and I think about 30 years into this. I wrote my letter to Dear David Rubenstein because I am a banned media member, which is very disappointing from the new ownership. I mean, extremely disappointing, quite frankly, that I'm locked out from watching the games. But that moment in the ballpark and that sound in the ballpark that can only have when it's full, it doesn't get full all that often anymore, which I'm writing a letter to Katie Griggs about that. Um, a moment and having moments where you win series, win big games, get a key hit in the seventh inning, get a double off the wall that we remember and talk about 10, 12 years later. Um, this is all those commercials, Major League Baseball. This is what we play. This is where these are the moments. I don't know where the pile diver is. I always love using pile diver because I remember the day that I met Angela Showalter after Greg Bader and the Orioles told her that I was a bad guy and I'm to be avoided. I remember that day. Buck Showalter. It's the last press con. Well, I was at the Brandon High press conference last year. The last real press conference I attended, I snuck into at the Camden Yards warehouse the day they hired Buck Showalter. And Buck talked about pile divers. Pile. He didn't say that a lot during the course of his time here, but pile divers. And I thought, who are the pile divers here? To me, Jordan Westberg is my favorite pile diver. Just this is the gritty time of the year where like heroes are made and the Aaron Boone home runs happen and the I want to feel that I want that for our fans. I mean, and if we're here Thursday and we got our feelings hurt and Reagan shuts him down on Tuesday and somehow the bullpen blows it on Wednesday and it's just not good enough and Cano isn't whatever happens here and they don't hit the ball, which I mean, if there's any reason that we're here reading a requiem over them before the Ravens play next weekend, it's going to be because they don't hit the ball, and they haven't hit the ball consistently in months. Um, I just want to have some moments, and there were none last year, right? I mean, they made the
Right.
playoffs; it was a good time and all that. I don't want our best moment to be the curse of Andino for crying out loud. Let's improve upon that, and this is the only time you can improve upon that because walk-offs for Jackson Holiday and sitting little baseballs out and saying, and we did this, we had a walk-off, we danced, we had water fountains, and we squirted everybody in May. No, 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 no. These are every one of these is times 10 for games. No, times 100 because the memory will be there if they win and if they lose, we'll look back on August and September and say they are who we thought they were because they haven't been a very good baseball team the last 2 months. They really haven't.
No, they haven't. The offense is obviously a big part of that. I would actually disagree with you a little bit though, because you asked me how I was feeling about the team going into the season or going into the postseason. I'm a little nervous about the bullpen. Imagine that, right? Imagine that. But at the same time, we talked about this last week. I mean, Yennier Cano not looking great his last few times in the regular season. Even Sir Anthony Dominguez, they got him some work on Sunday and, gave up a walk, gave up a hit. It's been a little choppier for him. And just the general, do you have enough length? Do you have enough guys that are going to miss bats and do that? I mean, look, obviously it's a non-starter if they don't swing the bats at all. And Cole Reagan tosses 7 shutout innings, and Seth Lugo tosses 6 shutout innings in game 2, and then chances are you're probably going home at that point. I mean, it's that simple. So of course, I mean, I don't want to even say extreme example because you're right. I mean, we saw in August and very much, especially in the first 3 weeks of September, how much they struggled to swing the bats. Of course, you've got to play complete baseball, right? I mean, there's no such thing as, especially considering where the Orioles are, because you don't have Kyle Bradish, you don't have Grayson Rodriguez's upside, right? I mean, you have Corbin Burns, who's a bona fide ace, Zach Eflin, who pitched a lot like that, but generally speaking has not been that in his career. I mean, even last year for Tampa Bay, I mean, was as close as he's been to an ace, but generally he's been more league average to above average. I'm hoping his last start against the Yankees was a little bit of an aberration, with the walks and not because he's wearing down or anything like that. But I mean, you've got to play complete across the board. This isn't like we talk about it all the time about Lamar putting on the cape, right? And Lamar doing it all for the Ravens at times, especially in a pre-Derrick Henry world, right? But there's no such thing as that in baseball, right? I mean, unless I guess you have the most extreme of Reggie Jackson hitting 3 home runs or something along those lines. baseball's such so dependent on passing the baton and having more than one guy do it. So, yeah, they need their offense to look more like it did over the last week or so. And you mentioned Jordan Westburg being a pile driver. You can't just have one. You need five or six guys that are going to do it, right? I mean, okay, there might be an MVP of a series, but they're going to need multiple guys to swing the bats. That Gunnar Henderson, who was far and away their best player this year. Anthony Santander, who led them in home runs. They're going to need those guys to be big. They're going to hope that Adley Rutschman wakes up. We've been talking about it for 2 months now, but it improves their chances tremendously if Adley Rutschman can swing the bat more like he did in the first half than what we saw in the second half, which was one of the worst regulars in Major League Baseball, offensively over the last 3 months. So, there's a lot. There's a lot to really like about this team. We've talked about this all along. You don't get to a point where their high water mark was 24 games over 500. You don't get to that point in June or early July by being, just really, really lucky. They were excellent over the first half of the season. But to your point, they weren't so good over the second half of the season. And that's where you kind of look, not that the Royals are a mirror image of them, but, the Royals were a team that was very hot and cold over the course of their 86 and 76 win season. I mean, they had some stretches where they looked fantastic, and they had some other stretches where you wondered if they were going to win another game. A week ago at this time, we were wondering if they were going to make the playoffs because they kind of looked like, oh, that's not looking good. But give them credit, they did just enough, and other teams like the Minnesota Twins completely collapsed and allowed them to make it. But it's a new season now, and that's why when you look at these short series, it's hard to focus on anything but the pitching. And that's where you look at this and say, hey, Burns against Reagans. We saw it twice in April. The one matchup, Reagans was excellent. The other matchup in Kansas City, the Orioles clobbered Reagans, and he was out after a couple innings. So you're hoping to see more of that than the former. But this is a team that really leaned on its rotation big time, and they've got. Don't get me wrong, they've got hitters. I mean, Bobby Witt's one of the best players on the planet. I mean, we love our guy here in Baltimore, Gunnar Henderson, but Bobby Witt in the second half was every bit as great as Gunnar was in the first half, but add in more athleticism, right? So I mean, he's a phenomenal talent. That lineup 1 through 9 doesn't necessarily frighten you, but they certainly have guys that can do damage. And again, there feels like they were able to right the ship a little bit, I suppose, but it's a clean slate. Everything anything that you would say about the Royals in terms of how they finished in September, you kind of say the same thing about the Orioles in terms of wanting to paint an optimistic picture and say, hey, fresh start, put September behind you, put August behind you. You swung the bats really well over the last 5-6 games of the season. Great. Now let's roll that into October. But again, that Royals rotation, they're going to have something to say about it because, I mean, when you're talking about pitchers with the ERAs that they have and the wins above replacement, you look at Reagans and Seth Lugo. I mean, these were 5-win pitchers, in terms of wins above replacement. I mean, that's rare territory there. I mean, that's really, really good. And not to mention Michael Wacha doing what he did. So, again, there was such a hyper focus on the Tigers because they played them in September. And these teams haven't met since April. I mean, think about everything that's changed for the Orioles since April. You throw that out. I mean, I don't know if any of that's relevant, but they better be ready to play because this is the Royals are kind of where the Orioles were a year or two ago, where you just say they might just be ignorant enough to not realize that they're ahead of schedule. And especially when you're talking about a best of 3, you better start fast because you can have a bad 24 hours and then we're giving this team's eulogy, and certainly no one wants that. But what you mentioned, at the very least, forgetting about the World Series or anything like that at the moment, at the very least, how about win a postseason game for the first time since 2014? Let's start with that. And to your point, just give the fan base a moment here. Whether it's a Delman Young kind of moment, where it's something dramatic, come from behind, walk off, whatever it is, something like that, which obviously would help them win a game, but it also would be a jolt of energy that this team, this fan base needs that reward, right? I mean, regular season
Well, they
stuff is
don't need to
fun.
win the World Series to have a moment. We're still talking about Delman freaking Young, and nobody even knows if he was walking through Baltimore, nobody even know who he is, right? So like, and they didn't win the World Series. They're like talking about Tito Landrum when or Rick Dempsey. Like I just, for me, it's been a long time since they've had a moment there
Yeah.
that hasn't been Billy Joel or Bruce Springsteen, like literally. And I'm getting old, and they can only have these moments now because you can win all the games you want in April and May and June. You can have all the exciting, you can drink from. You have five hoses on that water hydration bong that they've the Homer hose or whatever they are. I just I want to see the promise for all the year, all the new ownership, all the new everything. And by the way, I have a letter coming for David Rubenstein this week that the fans get to squeeze some juice out of this and the players do too, because it's been a little morose the last couple of months because I think hope was a little bit lost. My hope's not lost on any of this, but they don't need to win the World Series to have a successful October in my mind because I think the expectations have been set differently. I think if the World Series started in July, they better win or bust, or certainly win a series or
Yeah.
two. And I think watching them play over the last 60 to 90 days, and I think the injuries were certainly a part of that through pitching,
A
the,
huge
dis-
part, sure,
the
yeah.
disappointment of the bullpen, the fact that the bats went cold, the fact that the 1-1 and Adley Rutschman. I mean, this would be like Lamar Jackson not looking good all of a sudden when Adley Rutschman doesn't look good. And you say, well, how can we win without him? I want to see the leaders lead and all the things that you talked about back before the trading deadline, which was, yeah, Mike Elias can deal for Zach Eflin or Eloy Jimenez or, Trevor Rogers or deal for any of these guys. The guys who are going to need to win this are named Rutschman and Henderson and Santander and Kowser and Westberg, the guys. I want to see that. By the way, and we'll talk more baseball. We're going to talk baseball all week. I find the Arizona Diamondbacks situation on Monday to be like the way they've done this. They used to do the 1 day playoff. Remember that Randy Johnson game years ago where the 1 day playoff and like they play all night and what happened to the schedule and rain delays in baseball and a doubleheader in the middle of a monsoon where that's going to decide whether the Diamondbacks get on a plane to Milwaukee, and if they split the series, it's no bueno. It has to be a sweep. Just a wild circumstance. I'm glad the Orioles aren't in that circumstance. That's all.
Oh, sure, no question, and especially on the heels of the Diamondbacks, they had a really good second half, and then it's like, what happened at the very end, right? I mean, they were really trending up, and then you're at the mercy of other outcomes. And to your point, you don't have these games 163 scenarios now. It's all about tiebreakers, and they're doing that because they added another round to the playoffs. So I get that. I'm not. That's not even a criticism. It's just the reality of what it is.
They
But
should flip a
yeah,
coin.
for as much as for as much hand wringing as there was about the Orioles over the last couple months, and I understand that, and I think you're right. I mean, I do think it zapped a lot of the enthusiasm. I think it's ramped back up over the last week. I think people are excited now, especially finally knowing what time the game is, even if you got to take off a half day of work at the very least. But there it is tough when you have a season that they had last year when that felt so ahead of schedule, when you have the first half that they had this year, and maybe not even first half, because by the last week of June, things were starting to go awry a bit. But just what they did through June 20th, whatever that date was when they finished off the series win in the Bronx when they completely clobbered the Yankees. That was the high water mark of the regular season, really. So it's tough when you can't maintain that and you backslide some, and you have a month of September that was on track to be a losing month until this last week, where fortunately they regrouped and they did what they needed to do to clinch the top wild card spot. The playoff making the playoffs itself, that was never in danger, because they had done such heavy lifting over the first 3 months. But wherever they're ultimately going to wind up, and you asked me a week ago whether I thought that they would still be playing. I forget what date you said. I said, or it was October 11th, I think it was, whatever it was. Point is, you asked me if they were going to make a deep run, and I said, if you want my honest opinion, I don't think that.
You
But that
don't
doesn't
think
mean
we're
they
having
can't.
pizza
That
next
doesn't mean they can't
Friday
get
and
on a
they're
roll
still in,
here.
right? That would be two
But if
series
they're
deep.
going to, I'm yeah, I mean that would be that they're ALCS bound. I'm not saying they can't. I'm not saying pack things up. It's over. I'm not. Of course, I'm not saying that. But if you're asking me, to bet $100 on it, I'm gonna say probably not because I'm concerned about their pitching. I just am. They've experienced so much attrition with their rotation, even though Dean Kramer pitched really well down the stretch, and obviously they have Eflin and Burns, 1-2 punch there that I'll take against most teams in the field. Maybe not every team, but most teams, I'd say, or at least I'll go up against any team. But the bullpen is still. I've been consistent. You've been hearing me talk about this since March, and obviously a lot's happened in terms of injuries and Craig Kimbrell not being effective and to the point where he's off the roster entirely. So that's where I have a tough time envisioning them playing deep, deep into October. But hey, no one liked the Texas Rangers bullpen at this point last year, so you never know. I mean, if Corbin Burns can be the best version of Corbin Burns and Zach Eflin can be the best version of Zach Eflin, and we see a Dean Kramer that looks like the Dean Kramer we've seen the last few couple weeks, got a heck of a shot, assuming they swing the bats well enough, right? So I'm not
Well,
going
the
to sit here.
readjustment of pitching, if
What's
Kramer doesn't have to pitch, if they win 2 games, things change a lot if this turns into a 18 inning series as opposed to a 30 inning series, right? Like to some
sure?
degree over the next couple of days. And that's about length from the starting pitching. That's about how they're going to swing the bats the next couple of days. But I don't want to see them playing baseball on Thursday, right? Like that. And, you know, the odds of that are probably you're the mathematician here as to how they would split. But man, if it comes down to Thursday and Dean Kramer's got the season on the line, I mean, I swallow hard on that, thinking about that just in a general sense with a little bit of a taxed bullpen, right? Let's say that all their guys are going on Tuesday and Wednesday, and let's say it goes 12 innings one day, whatever. Thursday becomes problematic. I won't feel good about Thursday if you and I are getting together Thursday morning and there is a Thursday.
Yeah, and look, a lot of that is just because it's an elimination game. I mean, that's just because you're never going to feel great about those situations. I mean, you'll feel great about whoever's pitching that night if it's a pitcher that you love seeing take the hill. But Game 7 and Game 5 in the division series, I mean, that's as nerve-wracking as it gets. I mean, your season's on the line. So, but you just spelled it out better than I did a few minutes ago, where you just said, talking about this series in terms of 18 innings compared to 27, or throw in an extra inning or two for good measure. That's where I do have my concerns about this team making a deep run. It's that cumulative impact of the pitching. It's not that the bullpen isn't good enough to do it on October 2nd. It's can they do it October 1st, 2nd, 3rd if necessary, October 5th, October 7th, October 9th and 10th, October 12th. You get my point. Like it starts to build, and that's a lot when you're talking about a bullpen that I don't have a high degree of confidence in every pitcher in that pen. I mean, I'd like to think I have a confidence in Sir Anthony Dominguez, but the last week or so it hasn't been looking as good. Same with Cano. I mean, Danny Coulombe, I love, but is it going to be Danny Coulombe he's back and there's no more rust and his elbow feels fine and all of that? Some of the other guys in the pen, CNL Perez walks too many hitters, I mean, and he's been a guy that they've tried to trust throughout the years. So, again, you can win a series, you can win games, with a less than great bullpen, but it's the cumulative impact when you're talking about, I mean, these guys are entering their 7th month of play. All these guys, not just the Orioles, all these teams, that's part of the endurance. We think about it in terms of it being a sprint in October because of these short series, but it takes a lot of endurance because, you're going to the bullpen quickly. We saw it how Brandon Hyde handled Dean Kramer in his last start. I mean, 2 times through the lineup and then they went to the pen. I'm guessing that's what you're going to see, certainly whether it's Kramer or, Albert Suarez, who's not going to pitch into a potential division series. I think that was clear based on how he through on Sunday. What, 6 innings, 71 pitches? But you're having to lean heavily on your pen. I've cited it for months now. The teams that made it to the World Series the last 3 years, they averaged using 4.5 to 5 relievers per game in October. I mean, that's what you're looking at there. So tell me your five that you feel the best about in the Orioles bullpen right now, and you might get 10 different answers from 10 different Orioles fans if you ask them that right now. So, but we'll see.
Well, this is what makes
Everything
me
starts
nervous if they
anew
get in
on
trouble
Tuesday,
early on
and you got Corbin
Tuesday.
Burns.
Yeah, I mean, if Burns is only 3 1/3 somehow and the game's 5-4, I that becomes problematic for me, right? Or right off the bat Tuesday, right?
Sure. Sure. And look, any team that's in that position, unless your pitching is so tremendous that you feel so great about 4 or 5 guys in your rotation, but if, and a lot of these teams are like the Orioles where it's like, hey, you have an ace, you've got a number two you feel really good about. Your number three, you're like, hey, okay. And then number four is kind of like, okay, can that guy get us one time through the order, a clean, and then we'll kind of go hitter to hitter after that. There are other teams in this postseason field that kind of fit that description, and that's kind of where the Orioles are. So yeah, you're going to have to lean on your bullpen a whole lot. But you've made the point for probably the better part of the last month. You've talked about game one, game one, game one, game one. In a best of three, especially, forget about the division series, forget about the LCS, forget about the World Series for the moment. When you're talking about a best of three, game one is massive. I mean, it absolutely is massive. Kind of in the way that you think about a regular season series where you say you win game one, you got a heck of a chance to win a best of three, right? Only your season's on the line. This isn't May or June or even September. So yeah, they need Burns to be great. Yeah, they need to go out and not get completely shut down by Cole Reagans. But if they don't, then it's, hey, you're playing for your life and all hands on deck, and you can't worry about the next day or the next series. I mean, you got to do whatever you can to survive. I mean, that's just where it is right now. So it would be way easier to do that if your offense looks like the offense we saw in the first 3 months of the season. There's no question about it. So, hey, I wish I had some genius insight for you, but it's a best of three baseball series. I mean, the stakes are so much higher, but it's a best of three. It's not much more than a coin flip in one direction or the other. I mean, it really isn't. So that's why you hope that you play well, and you hope that the ball bounces your way. I mean, that's a big part of this. I say it all the time in October, Nestor. Luck is way more involved in October baseball than anyone cares to admit. Uh, yeah, you need your great players to be great. You need some lesser players to be better than you expect if you're going to make that deep run. But so much of it still comes down to, is the ball going to bounce your way? Is the umpire going to make the call in the spot on that 2-2 pitch with two guys on base? So, we're going to see. And again, this Orioles team, you hope last year's experience plays a part this year with these guys hopefully being a little more comfortable, understanding the tempo, the crowd noise, everything that's involved in October baseball. And in turn, you hope that the Kansas City Royals, who other than a couple veteran players here and there, largely, I mean, Bobby Witt's never played in the postseason. Gunnar Henderson has. Adley Rutschman has. So you're hoping that there's a little bit of an edge there that I don't think is going to be the deciding factor in the series, but you hope it can give the Orioles a little bit of an edge to, at the very least, get off on the right foot in game one.
He's Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke. He will be at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. I am banned. David Rubenstein's finally getting his letter. He's owned the team for 6 months now. I have been locked out for 6 months. Luke will be at the ballpark Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Luke will maybe not Thursday. Luke will be in Owings Mills maybe on Friday. We don't have any rain in the forecast here. It's a weird week, man. I will be here monitoring it all. I am a very available individual. And I'm going to be doing a lot of writing this week. Hope you're enjoying my columnist. If you haven't watched our retrospective, hope that you do that. I have a letter to Eric DaCosta. I have a journalistic letter out about how I'm banned and my employee is allowed to go. But the Luke will do a bang-up job. And, hey, look, if they lose, it's your fault because you're there and I'm not. So Luke will be down at the ballpark, and the Ravens are off the hook here for at least a little while after a really, really impressive win on Sunday night against the Buffalo Bills. Ravens at 2-2. Orioles at 0.0, but can earn a World Series here this month. So big doings around here. Big times at the ballpark. 4 o'clock Tuesday, 4:30 on Wednesday. Hopefully not necessary on Thursday, but if so, it'll be 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. I am eating oysters everywhere. It's all brought to you by our friends at the Liberty Pure Solutions Water Company. They keep your well water clean, and they're great plumbers as well. They've done all the work for me over the last couple of years. Doug Workman and his friends, 1-800-CLEAN-WATER, and also Liberty Pure Solutions. I highly vouch for them. Just like the oysters keeping the Chesapeake Bay clean, I've been eating oysters every single day for our 26th anniversary. 26 days, 26 oysters, 26 ways. It all launches tomorrow on October 1st. So we're going to do that through the month of October. It's also brought to you by our friends at Curio Wellness and Foreign Daughter. I'm wearing my Curio Orioles gear. I have purple gear. I have Maryland gear. And our friends at Curio Wellness and Foreign Daughter encourage you to learn more about CBD, THC, things that help, balms, rubs, things that help my aching back, like this crazy Move product that doesn't smell and isn't greasy and weird and makes me feel better because I have an L4 condition. So big thanks to Curio Wellness, as well as our friends at Jiffy Lube Multicare and Royal Farms for powering Luke up and getting him back and forth wherever he needs to be, from Camden Yards to Owings Mills and back and forth again. They don't let me go out of the house. I have to watch the games on television. I hope the announcers are good. That's the most important thing. He's Luke. I'm Nestor. Huge week ahead here. And it's not just because it's Luke's birthday. We'll be at Pizza John's next week celebrating with our friends at the Maryland Lottery. I'll have these Ravens scratch-offs to give away. Mark that down. Next Friday, it'll be an American League Championship preview as we go to, I want to be optimistic, Houston, because I think we can't beat Cleveland. Got to worry about beating Kansas City. He's Luke. I'm Nestor. Baseball, football ahead. We're Baltimore positive. Stay with us.